Nice to see you all. I mean, I can't see you, but I'm assuming that you're out there. It's actually a recurring nightmare of most pastors, that you get up to speak and there's nobody in the room. And so that's sort of what I'm experiencing. Thank you, Delaney. But no, I really know you're out there. You guys gave us a lot of great feedback last week. Most of the feedback was something like this: Dave, this is awesome. You can't tell if I'm sleeping. So we're glad to serve you in any way that we can. I got some feedback this morning that maybe some of you didn't hear the offering portion of our service, and we would hate for you to miss out on that part, right? No, but seriously, financial giving is a part of our Christian journey, even in days like this. We want to encourage you, knowing there's a lot of financial stress these days, but encouraging you to trust God, to give as you are able, not only for your own spiritual life, but also to support the work and the ministry of our church and other churches in this community. So thanks for that. Today, we're going to return to our series called Crossroads, and it seemed fitting because quite literally, we are in a crossroads sort of time, right? We find ourselves as a community, we find ourselves as families, we find ourselves as corporate entities in a place where we are making choices. A crossroad is a point in your journey where your direction has to go one way or the other, right? You have to choose. It's going to go this way or it's going to go that way. And often, a crossroad arises in your journey, in your life, as a result of something unexpected, something that you didn't expect to happen, right? And you have to choose. Well, these days, certainly, as a people, we are facing the unexpected, right? That's like the definition of the moment that we're in. It's a time that's unexpected. Even the act of attending church or participating in worship today, it's unexpected in the way that you have to go about it. And for most of us, that direction, the way the path seems to be headed, it really doesn't feel very positive. I mean, unless you're a Tampa Bay Bucks fan or a toilet paper producer, like things don't seem to be going positively for you, right? This week, I've spoken with a lot of people. I've spoken with students, lots of students who are trying to make sense of the new reality of going to school. High school seniors, I've got one in my home and connected that through her to some others. And there's a lot of unexpected things happening, right? The direction, the way your school year is going to end, it's not what you thought. People who are seniors in college, people facing graduations and wondering, what's that going to be like? I've got some teachers in my circle as well, and talk to others, even student teachers whose future is now clouded. Unexpected steps in the journey, right? I've talked to people who are business owners, who are making hard decisions, deciding how to move forward, not knowing what the path ahead means. I've talked to people who have family that are moving in, people with elderly parents that they care for and being isolated from them and deciding what to do about that. All very unexpected. And people are still facing all the other realities of life, like a cancer diagnosis and a surgery coming up, right? Pregnancy, having babies. In fact, one of our team is at the hospital today planning to have a baby. So shout out to Rachel and Caleb Darden. Hopefully you guys are watching, because what else do you have to do, right? Okay. What about retirement? That's the other thing I've talked to some people about. Wondering, should I? Could I? Maybe if I have a job in this moment, it's not a time to give up that job. Or if you're like me and your investment website has one of those counters on it, you know what I'm talking about? When you log onto their site and it says, based on your investments, based on your savings, you could retire in, and then it gives a date. Yeah, don't look at those websites today. Don't do that, right? Because the path, the direction, it might not be what you were hoping for. And all of these things provide us with a crossroad of circumstances for sure, but also a crossroad for many of us of faith. Because as Christians, as people of faith, or even as people thinking about faith, wondering about faith, considering faith, in moments like this, we ask questions like, where is God in all of this, right? God, where are you? Can I trust? Can I continue to trust God now in circumstances like that? Or maybe this question, how do I keep walking with God when I'm facing a crossroad? And that's a really good question. And so in our Crossroads series, we're examining people who are facing these crossroads. Each week, our plan is to see two different characters, right? Two people who are faced with a choice, going one direction or going another. And so that seems fitting and relevant for the days that we're living in. And so this morning specifically, we're going to see two characters in the story who really do face the question, what direction do you take when the path is unexpected? When things don't go the way that you had planned or the way that you had hoped, what do you do? And so we'll see two followers of Jesus face that circumstance this morning. So I'm glad that you're with us. We're going to pick up the story in Matthew chapter 26. We're in the end of the book of Matthew for our series. And it also seems fitting that in these days when we're talking about crossroads, we're talking about the unexpected, we're talking about how to keep walking with God, that the story or the time of year that we're in is that time of year where Christians again focus on, they celebrate the climactic events of Jesus' life, which we're going to see him point towards today, that involve his arrest and his trial and his crucifixion, his burial and his resurrection and his return to heaven. It's in those events, it's in that story and in that message that Christians for centuries have found a solid standing, a way to make decisions when they face a crossroads. And so that's where we're headed today. Matthew chapter 26, it starts with Jesus making this rather matter-of-fact announcement. Right? It says, when Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, as you know, the Passover is 2 days away, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified. I like how straightforward Jesus is. As you know, couple of days, I'm done. I'm out, right? Now, generally, when Jesus talks about his death, and he's talked about it before, his followers get very uptight. They get very confused. And each time he says it, they act like it's the first time that they've ever heard it, right? But this is Jesus saying, I know where I'm headed. This is the direction. Within 2 days, my life here with you, it will be over. He's headed to death on a cross. Crucifixion is death by means of a cross. And so that's why the symbol of the cross is so central and important in the faith of Christians. It represents the means of his death, right? Now, this is a little bit like jumping right into your favorite action movie right at the end. The other night, my family, we were watching Guardians of the Galaxy. And if you just tuned into that movie 10 minutes before the end, when all the climactic action is happening, you might think, what is this all about? What's the meaning? And that's true for these events in the life of Jesus, too. If you're just tuning in and picking it up where Jesus says, hey, in 2 days I'm out, you might be like, what's that about? And that's why it's always good and helpful to read and follow along with the bigger story. And as we've been talking about, a great way to do that is through our Bible reading plan, which you can actually find on our website, rdf.org. There's a big story, but what I want you to note from what Jesus says is two things that are really important. First of all, Jesus' death is not a surprise to him. He's not taken from behind. It doesn't sneak up on him. He knows it's part of the path. And the second thing is that he goes toward it willingly. And what we'll see in a moment is that willingness to walk that path, that willingness to embrace his own death, gives a lot of the understanding or a lot of the meaning behind the event. And we'll talk about that in a moment. He heads toward his own death very willingly. And then the scene shifts very quickly. Meanwhile, in verse 3, over on the other side of town, something is happening. It says, "Then the chief priests and the elders of the people, they assembled in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas, and they schemed to arrest Jesus secretly and to kill him. But not during the festival," they said, "or there may be a riot among the people." So, as if to give evidence to what Jesus has said is true, the scene shifts to these religious experts. The chief priests, the elders of the people, these are the most religious, and those who are charged with overseeing the religious life, the very significant religious practice of the Jewish people. But instead, they really act more like the mafia, right? That's kind of what they're doing. This is a picture of them meeting maybe in the back room of a restaurant, with the shades all drawn. What are we going to do? And like the mafia, the way they deal with their problems is, let's rub this guy out. We're going to take him out. We're going to kill him. By this time, these religious experts, they'd gotten tired of Jesus' teaching. His constant critique of their system. His constant talking about God in very personal terms, they didn't like that. His challenges to their place of authority, they certainly didn't like that. And their constant inference that a relationship with God was more about what was on the inside than what you did on the outside. And finally, as people were being wooed by Jesus or persuaded by Jesus, they finally got fed up and said, we're going to get rid of this guy. And so that's what's happening. The problem they have, as Jesus has already alluded to, it's the Passover festival time, which means a time when everybody would be traveling in, flooding into the city of Jerusalem, which for them was opportune. It was their chance to find Jesus, get their hands on him. But the difficulty was the people really liked Jesus. So if they did anything during this festival, there might be a riot. They have one other problem. The guy they're trying to kill secretly, he knows they're coming for him. But they'll persist. And it is this beginning of events that really sets up the crossroads for Jesus' followers. His announcement that within 2 days, I'll be gone. I'm going to a cross. I'm on the road to the cross. And that's going to provoke in them a reaction, because the rest of the story really is about the way Jesus' followers react to this news and to the actions of the religious mafia when they come looking for Jesus. And so we want to look at that. And to do that, we have to talk a little bit about death. People don't like to talk about death, but in this setting, in this story, it's sort of central to the meaning and to the purpose. When I was in high school, one of the most jarring events of my young life was when my 16-year-old friend Sean, he died suddenly from an aneurysm. And for me and for most of my friend group, this was our first up close and personal experience with death. I know a lot of you, possibly all of you that are listening, have in some way or shape experienced that. Someone that you know, someone that you love, someone that you care for, passing away, maybe even suddenly. And for my friends and I, the struggle to cope with Sean's death, it was complicated one day when we were having lunch in a classroom with one of our teachers. And while we were in the room, the teacher found tucked away in her desk drawer a note, and she unfolded it, and it was a note from Sean. And it said something to the effect of, "Just want you to know I love you in case I don't see you again." And for us, that was like, whoa! Did he know? Did Sean have some kind of premonition about his death? Well, it's similar for Jesus' followers. Like they experience not a premonition, but Jesus saying, I am going to die. And just like you, when you experience either the imminent or the unexpected death of someone that you love, you think that is not the path that I would choose. That's not how I want things to go, right? And you think if I knew that, like what we all thought is if Sean knew about his imminent death, if we knew that, we would have done something about it. That's our typical reaction. And we're going to see Jesus' followers react to this event because these crossroads are true for us too. Number one, when the road ahead isn't what you think, it causes you to make choices. When the direction isn't what you would plan for or what you think is best, it puts you at a place of crossroad of deciding how you're going to react to that. But on the bigger scale, the event of the death of Jesus himself creates a crossroads for many of us. Do you find meaning? Can you find meaning or value in that event? It really comes to be a part, along with the resurrection, of the very central, climactic events of the Christian faith. And so we need to talk about those things. So these two followers of Jesus in particular, they face this crossroads at a dinner party. Because the very next thing that happens, it says in verse 6, is Jesus is at a dinner party. It says, while he was in Bethany in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, which she poured on his head as he was reclining at the table. Now, for most of us, we read that sounds very bizarre, right? We don't pour things over people's heads very often in our culture. I mean, if you do, it's like a prank, right? Or it's a joke. But this is a very serious, almost a solemn moment at this dinner party when a woman pours a jar of perfume on Jesus' head, right? Now, this woman, in John's gospel account, he names this woman Mary. Mary, the sister of Martha, the sister of Lazarus. And so we're going to call her Mary. Best as we know, that's who this is. Mary comes into this room and she does this thing that in their culture was more normal, in that you would anoint the head of somebody who was an honored guest in your home, or, people like kings and prophets and things like that, they got anointed. They had oil or expensive perfume poured over their head. But what was unusual in this particular account is the emphasis on how costly this was for Mary. There's two things in this paragraph that point to that. The first is that she came to him with an alabaster jar. And that in and of itself, in their culture, was a very expensive jar. And it would have been sealed. The only way to open it was to break it. But all by itself, the container was of great value. For us, it'd be like having a crystal container, maybe. But then the perfume, the stuff inside, was very expensive, it tells us. When Mark tells this story, he says the perfume was worth 1 year's wages. Think about that. The average amount that a person makes in a year, that's the value in this perfume, right? And that is a shocking statement of how costly this is. She does this very extravagant, very lavish act of pouring this super expensive perfume on Jesus' head. And the followers of Jesus who are sitting there at the table, they react, well, they kind of react like you and I probably would, right? This is verse 8. When the disciples saw this, they were indignant. That means they were out of their minds. Why, they say, this waste? That was a waste. This perfume, it could have been sold at a high price, a year's salary, a very high price. And you know what? The money could have been given to the poor. What a waste. And honestly, when you and I hear things like that, we react that way too. You know? Who's going to do that with that expensive of a bottle of perfume? Actually, last month, my wife's birthday, I bought her some perfume. And I sort of gulped at buying her a bottle of perfume that didn't even cost one day's wages, right? Much less a year's wages. And sometimes I react this way to people when they do things that seem extravagant. I think something like, well, you could have dug a lot of wells. But Jesus disagrees with them. Look what Jesus says in verse 10. Aware of this, that they are complaining and freaking out about this, aware of this, Jesus said to them, "Why are you bothering this woman? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me. And when she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial." What they saw so clearly as a wasteful act, Jesus defines as a beautiful act. And then he says this thing that sometimes gets misinterpreted. Jesus loved helping the poor. He acknowledges that that is an ongoing, continual responsibility of the people of God. And so he interprets what she does not as waste, but in her extravagance, in her devotion, he sees the beauty in it. And I want you to just let that linger in your hearts for a little bit. It means that act of devotion on your part. Other people might look at the way you express your relationship with God and they might think, what a waste of time, a waste of money. I want you to hear Jesus say to you today, I think what you do is beautiful because you do it for me. Jesus always loves, always accepts our costly acts of devotion toward him. But the other reason Jesus says that this is a beautiful thing is because performing these acts of anointing was an important part of the burial process for the Jewish people. And when Jesus says, I'm going to die, and I'm going to die on the cross, he's signaling that he's going to die the death of a criminal. And that probably would have meant to them that he wouldn't get burial rights. And so this important act of honoring and dignifying those who die, Mary says, I'm going to do it now. When it's not the way she would want things to go, it's not the direction she had planned, she takes a step of embracing it. She affirms it. She says, if this is the path, if this is the direction that you have to go, Jesus, I want you to know I'm going there with you. And so when she faces her crossroads of what to do, she decides to keep following the path of Jesus, even though that means he's headed for his death, something she would not have wanted. And so when Mary does this, she affirms this road to the cross. And in fact, this becomes her story. Look at the next verse. This is a remarkable verse. Truly, I tell you, Jesus said, wherever this gospel, this good news is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. Her act of devotion, her willingness to affirm and embrace the value and the purpose and the death of Jesus, something maybe beyond what her other friends could see. Jesus said, that's her story. And indeed it is. It's a story we tell. It's a story we read. And we honor her for that step of faith. But there's a second character in the story, someone who's also sitting at this table who has a very different reaction to these events. His name is Judas, and you might have heard of him. Verse 14, the very next verse. Then, at that moment, then, one of the 12, meaning one of Jesus' closest followers, the one called Judas Iscariot, he went to the chief priests and he asked, what are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you? And so they counted out for him 30 pieces of silver. And from then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. Can you believe that? A lot of us, even if you're not super familiar with the Christian story, you know about Judas, right? Judas becomes the betrayer of Jesus. He goes from being one of his closest associates to being really a paid informer. And this decision by Judas is going to lead to a very, very fateful set of events. If you read the pages going forward, you'll see the next thing that happens is what we call the Last Supper. And Jesus has this last meal with his followers, and he says, one of you is going to betray me. And Judas looks him in the eye and says, it's not me, it's not me. And Jesus says, I think we both know it is. And Judas leaves them at that moment. And later when they go, Jesus and his disciples, they go out to the Garden of Gethsemane for him to pray. It's not long before Judas shows up. He's got the religious mafia. He's got the guards with him. And he points out Jesus to them, and they arrest him. And we don't know a lot about Judas. People have speculated for centuries about his motives and his reasons and what he did. Anything we say about that really is speculation. All we know is this. Judas was in that room with Jesus when Jesus said, I'm going to my death. And there was something about that culminated when Jesus said, what this woman has done, this is a beautiful thing. She's prepared me for my burial. That's the moment Judas says, I'm out. I can't walk this path any longer. Whatever disillusionment he had come to have about Jesus and his direction, it boils over. And he says, I got to put a stop to this. Probably like a lot of his contemporaries, Judas was looking for something powerful in Jesus, something political, something national. Their concept of a Messiah was somebody who would free them from the oppression they faced from the Roman Empire, someone who would restore their nation to greatness. And when he sees Jesus heading in a different path, he says, this is not what I signed up for. And he does become the person, ironically, whose actions lead directly to Jesus' death. I don't know that he saw that coming. But I want you to see how in the moment where Mary is able to embrace the purpose of Jesus, even in his death, a path that isn't the one that she would have planned, Judas stumbles over that very same thing. He can't see the path going in that direction. He doesn't want to keep walking if Jesus' way means he's headed to that way. And he can't find in the death of Jesus any significant meaning or value for him or for his people. And so he gives Jesus up. And it's a powerful, powerful story of crossroad between these two. When things don't go as expected, it brings us to a crossroad. Maybe you feel like you're in that place today too. Maybe you've even been in Judas' shoes and wondering what meaning, what value is there in these events that Christians talk about, especially at this time of year. Today I want to urge you, I want to encourage you on the path with Jesus. I want to help you, if I can, find meaning and value, particularly in the death of Jesus. The reality is the death of Jesus doesn't stand by itself. It always goes with, it's accompanied by his resurrection. The gospel always puts those events together. And Jesus comes into human experience. He places himself fully into the human condition. He experiences even suffering and death. It allows us to come to God and say, you do know our suffering. I'm encouraged by the fact that you, God, have walked in my shoes. He does. He died in this sense with us. And when he rises from the dead, he demonstrates his power over our greatest enemies, sin, the outworking, the unfolding of human evil. The very thing that the Bible says disconnects us from God, keeps us from relationship with Him. And of course, the ultimate enemy, death, which in the Bible is always portrayed as a double death, physically and spiritually. And when Jesus comes back from the dead, He shows us that He has power over those enemies. And He has the ability to give life to us. A life that's rooted in a spiritual connection with God and that overcomes even the borders of our physical lives. This is what Paul means when he writes his book to the Corinthians and says, Jesus died for our sins. And the Bible uses a lot of different pictures and a lot of different metaphors to describe how that works and what that means, but the upshot is this. Our sins keep us disconnected from God. Look around, friends. Look at our world. We are struggling and afraid and desperately looking for hope, but completely unconnected to our God as a culture. Our Creator, the one who loves us so desperately. And the Scriptures say that distance, that separation from God is solved by the death of Jesus. In a way that is mysterious to many of us, it's the truth that the Bible proclaims. You can be reconnected to God. You can be reconciled to God and reconnected to the life that He offers you. Last week we saw Jesus say, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. And this week Jesus is saying, this is how I do it. It might not be what you expect, but this is how I do it. Take heart. The unexpected message that the death of Jesus and His resurrection paved the way, provide the way for life. A life connected to God, a life full of purpose and perseverance, a life beyond even the unexpected circumstances that we face. That's what I want to encourage you toward. Keep following. Embrace the unexpected path. Find in the events of the Easter season a faith, a grounding that gives you foundation for a life that finds comfort and peace and purpose in your circumstances. Come along the path. Yesterday we decided to get out of the house and go for a walk out in the open air, and we just went around the corner from our house and hopped on the trail, the horse trail here in Yorba Linda, where we promptly met every single other person who lives in Yorba Linda, right? Everybody was on the path. And people were trying to keep their distance and stuff, but there was a lot of waving. There was a lot of interaction verbally, looks in the eye, that sort of thing. And I came away from it very heartened, feeling like there's other people on the path with me. And I want you to know that's true. That's true about your life today. Come to the path. Embrace the unexpected direction of Jesus that includes His death and His resurrection. And you'll find there many others, many of us who have found this life from God, who can testify to its power and its peace and its purpose beyond our circumstances. God bless you in these days.